I want an open marriage. Let's explore other options for having children. These were the exact same words that broke Maya Peters' 4 years marriage. Worse, his mother arranged for a woman to move in after 24 hours. Maya thought her life was over until she bumped into him, Kang Jae-won, the most ruthless Korean mafia boss. He offered her an irresistible deal: be his girlfriend for revenge. Left with no option, Maya took it. But what she never expected happened. Before we dive in, kindly tell us your name and where you're watching from so we could get to know our amazing viewers. Done that? Now let's get back to the story. Maya's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of their mahogany dresser, the same one they'd picked out together during their honeymoon in Bali. Hyung-woo stood in their bedroom doorway, suitcase already packed, his expression a careful mask of determination that barely concealed something darker underneath. Guilt, perhaps, or worse, indifference. I want an open marriage, he said, his voice steady in a way that suggested he'd rehearsed this moment. We need to explore other options for having children. 4 years of marriage. 3 years of failed IVF treatments. 36 rounds of hormone injections that left her body aching and her emotions raw. Countless doctor's appointments where they'd sat side by side in sterile waiting rooms, her hand in his, believing they were in this together. And this was his solution? Maya's throat constricted. What do you mean, other options? Her voice came out smaller than she intended, barely more than a whisper. Hyung-woo shifted his weight, finally meeting her eyes. What she saw there made her stomach drop. This wasn't a suggestion. This wasn't even really a conversation. He'd already made his decision. I've met someone, he said. Her name is Soo-jin. She's Korean. My mother introduced us 3 months ago. 3 months. The words echoed in Maya's mind as she tried to process them. 3 months of lies. 3 months of him coming home late from work meetings and investor dinners. 3 months of her cooking his favorite meals, pressing his shirts, believing they were still a team fighting infertility together. She can give me a family, Hyung-woo continued, and Maya noticed he said, me, not us. Mother approves of her. She comes from a good family and she's young enough that we shouldn't have any problems. The words hit like physical blows, each one landing with precision. Maya had sacrificed everything for this marriage. Her marketing director position at a Fortune 500 company, a job she'd loved and excelled at, her independence, her identity, her body pumped full of hormones and punctured with needles, all in service of creating the family he claimed to want. She'd learned Korean, spending hours with language apps and tutors, stumbling through conversations with his relatives at family gatherings. She'd mastered traditional Korean cooking, burning herself countless times as she learned to navigate the complexity of bibimbap, kimchi jjigae, and japchae, all to please a mother-in-law who never once thanked her or acknowledged her efforts. And through it all, while she was transforming herself into the wife she thought he needed, she'd been funding his tech startup dreams. Her savings, the nest egg she'd built over a decade of hard work, had been poured into his company, supporting them both while he chased his vision of becoming the next Silicon Valley success story. Maya, you need to understand, Hyung-woo said, his tone taking on an edge of impatience, as if she were being unreasonable. This isn't about replacing you. We can make this work. Lots of couples have arrangements like this. Arrangements? The word felt foreign on her tongue. What kind of arrangement? She's moving into the master bedroom, he said, his words coming faster now, as if speed would make them easier to digest. Mother thinks it's the best solution for everyone. You can stay in the guest bedroom. We'll figure out the details as we go. Schedules, finances, boundaries. We'll make it work. Maya's world tilted on its axis. The bedroom they'd shared for 4 years suddenly felt like a stage set, everything familiar now rendered strange and hostile. The wedding photos on the dresser mocked her. The indentation on his side of the bed seemed like evidence of a crime. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't even an argument. It was a declaration. Her marriage was over, but she was expected to remain, not as a wife, but as a spectator to her own replacement. You want me to live here? She said slowly. While you start a family with another woman? In our home? It's the logical solution, Hyung-woo replied, and she heard his mother's voice in his words. You have nowhere else to go. You left your job. Your lease is long gone, and legally you're still my wife. This way, everyone gets what they need. What they need, not what she needs. The distinction was clear. Maya looked at this man she'd promised to love and honor, this stranger wearing her husband's face. She saw it now. He'd never really seen her as a partner. She'd been a project, a placeholder, someone to manage the household and fund his dreams while he waited for something better to come along. And his mother had found exactly what he'd been waiting for. A younger Korean woman who could give him the perfect family he'd always envisioned, the one Maya's failing body had denied him. "Your mother planned this," Maya said, the pieces finally clicking into place. "She's been planning this for 3 months, maybe longer." Hyung-woo didn't deny it. He didn't need to. The truth was written in his silence, in the way he checked his watch as if this conversation were just another appointment on his calendar, something to be efficiently managed and concluded. "Soo-jin arrives tomorrow," he said. "I'll pick her up from the airport in the afternoon. It would be good if you could prepare the guest room. Maybe make something nice for dinner. We want this transition to be as smooth as possible." The audacity of it stole her breath. He wanted her to prepare the nest for her replacement, to cook dinner and play hostess to the woman who was moving into her home, into her life, to fulfill the role she'd apparently failed at. Soo-jin's designer luggage, matching Louis Vuitton pieces in pristine condition, sat in Maya's living room the next day like an invading army claiming conquered territory. 3 suitcases, a vanity case, and a hat box, all arranged with careful precision near the entrance as if awaiting formal installation. Her former guest room, the one Maya had painted a soft sage green last spring and furnished with vintage finds from Itaewon markets, now belonged to a stranger who smiled with perfectly painted coral lips and spoke to Hyung-woo in rapid Korean, their voices carrying down the hallway in melodic bursts punctuated by laughter. Inside, jokes Maya wasn't part of, references to people she didn't know, a familiarity that couldn't possibly have developed in just 3 months, unless they'd spent far more time together than Hyung-woo had admitted. Maya stood frozen in her own kitchen, surrounded by the copper pots she'd collected and the herb garden she'd been cultivating on the windowsill, feeling like a ghost haunting her own life. The basil she'd been so proud of seemed to mock her now with its vibrant green leaves. The doorbell rang, and Maya's stomach clenched. She knew who it would be. Hyung-woo's mother swept in like a cold front, arms laden with banchan containers, homemade kimchi, seasoned spinach, marinated bean sprouts, the traditional welcome for a new family member. She wore her best hanbok, the silk one reserved for special occasions, and her face was transformed by a smile Maya had never once seen directed at herself. "Soo-jin-ah," she called out, her voice warm with genuine affection. The younger woman emerged from the guest room. No, her room now, dressed in a simple but expensive linen dress that somehow made Maya's jeans and sweater feel shabby by comparison. The embrace between them was everything Maya had yearned for during 4 years of marriage. Hyung-woo's mother held Soo-jin's face in her hands, speaking rapidly in Korean, her eyes actually misting with tears of joy. Maya understood every word, the blessing, the welcome, the gratitude that finally, her son would have the family he deserved. "You must be hungry after your journey," Hyung-woo's mother said, bustling toward the kitchen, toward Maya. For a moment their eyes met, and Maya saw something flicker in the older woman's expression. Not quite guilt, more like satisfaction. "Maya, see," she said, her tone shifting to the formal coldness Maya knew so well. "You should help me prepare lunch. It's the least you can do to welcome your house guest." House guest. The word was chosen with surgical precision. Maya moved mechanically, taking out dishes, preparing the table. The kitchen had been her sanctuary, the one place where she felt competent and in control. She'd renovated it herself last year, choosing every tile, every cabinet pull, spending hours researching the best layout. She'd paid for it with the last of her savings, a gift to Hyung-woo for their 3rd anniversary. Now it felt like a cage. "Maybe if you weren't so focused on your little design hobby, you'd be healthier," Hyung-woo's mother said in Korean, her voice pitched just loud enough to carry. She was arranging the banchan on the table, not looking at Maya. "Too much computer time isn't good for fertility. Soo-jin knows this. She takes proper care of herself." The words landed like stones. Maya's hands stilled over the rice cooker. The humiliation burned deeper than any pain she'd known, worse even than the hormone shots, worse than the negative pregnancy tests, worse than Hyung-woo's initial announcement. Because this wasn't just an insult. It was a verdict, delivered with the casual cruelty of someone who believed she was simply stating facts. And Hyungwoo, sitting in the living room with Soo-jin, said nothing, did nothing. Didn't even look up from the photo album they were browsing through. His childhood pictures, Maya realized with a fresh stab of pain. Sharing his history with his future, while his present wife stood 10 feet away being systematically erased. Maya had spent 4 years learning Korean, 4 years of grammar books and language exchange meetups and watching dramas without subtitles until her eyes ached. She'd done it all hoping to bridge the gap with his family, to prove she belonged, to show she was worthy of being Hyungwoo's wife. And all along, his mother had known. Known that Maya understood every whispered criticism, every pointed comment, every joke made at her expense, and she'd said them anyway. Lunch was an endurance test. Maya sat at the head of the table, her usual seat, but felt completely invisible. The conversation flowed around her in Korean, occasionally dipping into English when Hyungwoo wanted to include her in some superficial observation about the weather or the traffic. Soo-jin was gracious, almost apologetic, which somehow made it worse. She kept trying to include Maya, asking polite questions about the apartment, complimenting the decor Maya had chosen, as if they were new roommates learning to coexist rather than 2 women sharing a husband. After lunch, Hyungwoo stood up, his hand grazing Soo-jin's shoulder with casual intimacy. "I'm going to help Soo-jin finish unpacking," he said. "Maybe you could clean up, Maya. We'll be in the master bedroom." The master bedroom. Not just for tonight, as he'd promised. Not temporarily. The master bedroom that Maya had been asked to vacate to give Soo-jin space to settle in was now theirs. Past tense, present tense, future tense. Maya's clothes had been moved to the guest room. No, to Soo-jin's room. And then, finding no space there, into the study that doubled as storage. Maya watched them walk down the hallway, Hyungwoo's hand on the small of Soo-jin's back, the same gesture he used to make with her. The door closed behind them, and a moment later she heard laughter. Intimate, soft, the kind that comes from people discovering they like each other more than they expected. That night, after Hyungwoo's mother finally left and the apartment grew quiet, Maya stood alone in the kitchen she'd renovated. The kitchen she'd designed and paid for while Hyungwoo built his startup, the company that was now worth millions while she had nothing. She'd turned down a promotion to support his dream. She'd deferred her own ambitions, telling herself it was temporary, that they were building something together. But there was no together. There never had been. From the master bedroom, the room that was supposed to be a shared sanctuary, the room where she'd cried over negative pregnancy tests while Hyungwoo held her, came more laughter. Lower now. Murmured voices, the unmistakable sounds of her marriage ending in real time. Every sacrifice she'd made flashed through her mind in rapid succession. The career opportunities she'd turned down because Hyungwoo needed her support during a critical growth phase. The friends who'd drifted away because she was always too busy, too tired, too focused on being the perfect wife. The pieces of herself she'd carved off to fit into his family's expectations, her opinions, her personality, her dreams, until she barely recognized the woman in the mirror. She'd given everything. And it still hadn't been enough. Maya's hands shook as she gripped the counter. She couldn't stay here, not for one more minute, not for one more second. If she stayed, she would disappear entirely, becoming nothing more than a cautionary tale, a ghost story told in Korean to warn other women about the dangers of marrying outside their culture, of being unable to provide children, of being fundamentally inadequate. Grabbing her purse, Maya fled into the Seoul night. The apartment door closed behind her with a soft click that sounded like a period at the end of a sentence. The December air bit through her thin jacket, but she welcomed the cold. At least it was something she could feel, something real and present and undeniable. Tears blurred the city lights into streaks of neon, pink, blue, green, yellow, the colors running together like a watercolor painting left in the rain. Maya walked without direction, her feet carrying her through streets she'd walked 1,000 times before, all of them suddenly unfamiliar. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, nothing but the clothes on her back and a credit card. She wasn't even sure still worked. She'd finally hit rock bottom. Maya had been walking for hours, her feet aching in shoes, never meant for aimless wandering through Seoul's neon-lit streets. The December cold had seeped into her bones, but she couldn't bring herself to return to that apartment, to the sounds of laughter, to her displaced belongings, to the physical evidence of her erasure. She found herself in Gangnam, surrounded by luxury boutiques and high-end restaurants, their windows glowing with warm light that felt like mockery. Her reflection in the glass storefronts showed a stranger, red-rimmed eyes, mascara-tracked cheeks, hair disheveled from running her hands through it in frustration. She looked broken. She looked lost. A late-night cafe beckoned from the corner, one of those exclusive establishments with frosted windows, and a doorman who looked more like security than service staff. The kind of place where appearances mattered, where Maya definitely didn't belong in her current state. But it was open, and it was warm, and she was so tired of walking. She pushed through the door, head down, eyes still blurry with unshed tears. The interior was all dark wood and leather, jazz playing softly from hidden speakers, the air heavy with the scent of expensive coffee and even more expensive cologne. A handful of patrons occupied the space, their conversations hushed and intimate. Maya wasn't watching where she was going. Her mind was still in that apartment, replaying every humiliation, every moment of her spectacular downfall. She rounded a corner toward the counter and walked directly into someone, solid and unyielding. Her takeaway coffee cup, purchased from a convenience store 3 blocks back and now lukewarm in her trembling hands, lurched forward. The lid popped off, and she watched in horror as the dark liquid arced through the air in slow motion, heading straight for an immaculate Tom Ford suit. Charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, probably worth more than her entire wardrobe. The coffee missed by inches. "I'm so sorry, The words died in her throat as she looked up, and up. The man stood at least 6 feet tall, his presence commanding in a way that had nothing to do with height. Sharp cheekbones that could have been carved from marble, dark eyes that held a dangerous intelligence, assessing her in the span of a heartbeat with an intensity that made her breath catch. His hair was swept back with artful precision, his jawline sharp enough to cut glass. Everything about him screamed power, controlled, calculated, absolute power. Behind him stood 4 massive men in black suits, their positions strategic, their eyes constantly scanning. Professional security, the kind that cost more per hour than most people made in a day. They'd moved instinctively when the coffee flew, creating a human shield, and now stood ready to neutralize the threat she apparently posed. The man raised one hand in a subtle gesture, and his security froze, then stepped back with military precision. Maya's mind struggled to process what she was seeing. She knew this face. Everyone in Seoul's business circles knew this face, even if they'd only glimpsed it from afar or seen it in carefully controlled media appearances. Kang Jae-won. The name was whispered in Seoul's business circles with equal parts fear and reverence. His family's import-export business had been legendary for 3 generations, though no one quite specified what they imported or exported, and no one dared to ask. His hotel empire sprawled across Asia. The Kang properties were synonymous with opulence and discretion, the kind of places where deals were made and secrets kept. His reputation was dangerous in the way that old money and new power combined to create something unstoppable. People didn't refuse Kang Jae-won. They didn't even inconvenience him, and Maya had just nearly doused him in cheap convenience store coffee. "I'm so sorry," she repeated, her voice barely working. "I wasn't looking where I was going. I can pay for dry cleaning. You're Maya," he said, cutting through her rambling apology. His voice was low and smooth, like aged whiskey, with perfect English that held only the barest trace of a Korean accent. Hyung-woo Park's wife. Her heart stopped. How did he know her name? "I've seen you at the quarterly investor meetings," he continued, those dark eyes still studying her with unnerving focus. "You always sit in the back row, left side, 3rd seat in. You drink green tea, never coffee. You take notes on paper, not digitally. And you never speak, even when your husband presents ideas you clearly disagree with." Maya felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. She'd attended those meetings for 2 years, sitting quietly while Hyung-woo networked and pitched, feeling invisible in rooms full of power players and venture capitalists. She'd thought no one noticed her, that she was just another accessory, another supportive wife fading into the background. Jae-won had noticed, and more than that, he'd been watching. She had no words. The exhaustion, the emotional devastation, the shock of this encounter, it all crashed over her at once. She swayed slightly, and one of the bodyguards tensed, but Jae-won's hand came up again in that same subtle gesture. "Sit," he said, It wasn't quite a command, but it wasn't a suggestion either. He gestured to a private booth in the back corner, separated from the rest of the cafe by frosted glass partitions. The kind of space reserved for people who needed privacy, who conducted business that couldn't be overheard. "You look like you could use a drink." He dismissed his security with a movement so economical it barely qualified as a wave. The four men melted away, taking up positions throughout the cafe, by the door, near the counter, watching the windows, close enough to respond to trouble, far enough to provide the illusion of privacy. Every instinct Maya had screamed at her to refuse, to run. This was Kang Jae-won. His family's history was the stuff of legend and rumor, connections that stretched from Seoul to Hong Kong to Tokyo, businesses that operated in the shadows between legal and something else entirely. His hotels might be legitimate, but the family fortune that built them? That was a question no one asked twice. She'd heard the stories at investor meetings, whispered when people thought she wasn't listening, about competitors who withdrew suddenly from negotiations, about business partners who learned not to cross him, about loyalty that was rewarded generously and betrayal that was addressed. Nothing was ever proven, nothing was ever said outright, but the message was clear. Kang Jae-won was not a man to be trifled with. Maya should have apologized again, should have excused herself, should have fled this cafe and this man whose attention felt like standing too close to a fire, warm but potentially deadly. Instead, she found herself walking toward the booth, exhausted, hollow, with nowhere else to go and no one else who'd noticed she existed. She slid into the leather seat, feeling it contour to her body with the kind of expensive comfort that cost more than most people's furniture. Jae-won sat across from her, his movements precise and controlled, and somehow the space felt both larger and more intimate at once. A server appeared instantly, as if summoned by telepathy. "Whiskey," Jae-won said without looking at the menu. "Yamazaki 25, 2 glasses." The server disappeared without a word. No confirmation, no recitation of prices. That's when Maya realized this was his cafe. Of course it was. Men like Kang Jae-won didn't just visit establishments, they owned them. The whiskey arrived in crystal tumblers that caught the low light, casting amber reflections across the dark wood table. Jae-won lifted his glass in a subtle gesture that wasn't quite a toast, took a measured sip, then slid the second glass across the polished surface toward Maya. The movement was smooth, practiced, the action of someone who'd conducted countless negotiations in spaces exactly like this. "I know what happened today," he said, setting his glass down with careful precision. His eyes never left her face. "News travels fast in our community." Maya felt her stomach drop. Of course he knew. Seoul's elite circles were smaller than they appeared, everyone connected by invisible threads of business, family, and mutual interest. Her humiliation wasn't just personal, it was public. By now, everyone who mattered in their social sphere would know that Hyung-woo Park had replaced his American wife with a proper Korean woman, that his mother had orchestrated the whole thing, that Maya had been deemed insufficient and set aside like damaged goods. Seoul's underworld, because that's what Jae-won represented, even if his hotels and legitimate businesses provided a respectable veneer, knew about her failure as a wife. The thought made her want to crawl under the table and disappear. She stared at the amber liquid in her glass, watching it catch the light, wondering how much lower she could possibly sink. Was there a level below rock bottom? A sub-basement of humiliation she hadn't discovered yet? "Don't look so devastated." Jae-won's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts, his tone carrying an almost amused quality that made her look up. "I'm not here to judge you. I'm here to offer you a solution." Maya blinked. A solution? The word felt foreign, impossible. People like her didn't get solutions. They got sympathy at best, pity at worst, and mostly just got ignored. Jae-won leaned back in his seat, the leather creaking softly beneath him. Even his posture radiated control, one arm draped across the booth's back, the other resting on the table, fingers drumming a slow, thoughtful rhythm. "I need a partner for business events," he said, his tone shifting into something more businesslike, as if they were discussing a merger rather than her demolished life. Someone educated, poised, who can navigate high society functions without embarrassing themselves, someone who speaks both English and Korean fluently, who understands both cultures, who can make the right impression on investors and business partners from multiple markets. He paused, letting his words sink in before continuing. Someone beautiful, yes, but more importantly, someone whose presence sends a very specific message to certain people. Maya's heart began to beat faster. There was something in his tone, something calculated and cold, that suggested this wasn't a casual proposition. This was strategy. Particularly, Jae-won continued, his smile taking on a dark promise that made the temperature in the booth seem to drop several degrees. To Hyung-woo Park and his family, whose startup desperately needs my investment group's approval for their Series C funding, a decision that will be made in the next quarter. The implications settled over Maya like a silk shroud, beautiful and suffocating. She understood immediately what he was proposing. Jae-won wasn't offering her charity or even genuine companionship. He wanted to use her as a weapon, a very specific, very pointed weapon aimed directly at Hyung-woo and everything he'd built. And God help her, the idea sent a thrill of savage satisfaction racing through her chest, hot and fierce and utterly unexpected. Her hands, which had been trembling moments ago, grew steady. "What's in it for me?" The question surprised her even as she spoke it, the strength in her own voice, the way her spine straightened automatically, the sudden clarity in her mind. Just hours ago, she'd been fleeing her apartment in tears, broken and lost. Now she was negotiating with one of Seoul's most dangerous men as if she had any leverage at all. But maybe that was the secret. When you had nothing left to lose, you could afford to be bold. Jae-won's eyes gleamed with something that looked remarkably like approval. He took another slow sip of his whiskey, clearly enjoying the moment, letting the anticipation build. "A luxury apartment in Gangnam," he said, ticking off items as casually as if he were listing groceries. "One of my buildings, top floor. Your name on the lease, fully furnished, all expenses covered. Consider it a signing bonus." Maya's breath caught. A Gangnam apartment? She knew what those cost. Hyung-woo had looked at similar properties when his startup first got funding, before deciding they were too expensive, before settling for the place he, currently occupied. "A position as creative director at my hotel marketing division," Jae-won continued, "reporting directly to my VP of brand strategy. A real position with real responsibilities and a six-figure salary. Not a sinecure, Maya. I expect you to actually work, but you have the qualifications, and my team needs fresh perspective. Your background at that Fortune 500 company didn't escape my notice." He'd researched her. Thoroughly. The realization should have been unsettling, but instead it felt strangely validating. Someone had noticed her accomplishments, her potential, her worth beyond her ability to produce children. "Access to my network," he went on, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "My resources, my lawyers, my accountants, my connections, and my protection." The last word carried weight, an unspoken promise that no one would dare touch what belonged to Kang Jae-won. "Whatever you need to fully extract yourself from Hyung-woo and his family, divorce proceedings, asset division, anything, I'll provide." He leaned forward now, closing the distance between them, his presence overwhelming in the confined space. Maya could smell his cologne, something expensive and subtle with notes of cedar and bergamot. Could see the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the tiny scar above his left eyebrow that somehow made him more attractive rather than less. "And the satisfaction," he said softly, dangerously, "of watching Hyung-woo's world crumble as his biggest potential investor dates his wife. Of seeing his mother's face when you walk into the Shilla Hotel ballroom on my arm, wearing couture, belonging to someone infinitely more powerful than her son could ever hope to be. Of knowing that every business connection he needs, every door he wants opened, every opportunity he's counting on, all of it depends on my goodwill, which you will influence." The picture he painted was intoxicating. Revenge served cold and precise, wrapped in designer clothing and delivered at society functions where Hyung-woo would be forced to watch, powerless. 3 months, Jae-won said, sitting back again, giving her space to breathe, to think. "Appear with me publicly. Attend events on my arm. Play the role of my devoted girlfriend convincingly enough that everyone believes it, especially Hyung-woo. After that, you're free. The apartment, the job, the connections, all yours to keep. No strings attached, with enough money and influence to build whatever life you want. He picked up his whiskey glass, examining the amber liquid as if reading her future in its depths. Without him. The silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and danger. Maya's mind raced through the implications. This was a devil's bargain. There was no question about that. Kang Jae-won wasn't offering this out of kindness. He had his own agenda, his own reasons for wanting to torment Hyung-woo. She would be a pawn in whatever game he was playing, but she would be a pawn with a luxury apartment, a pawn with a six-figure salary and a legitimate career, a pawn who got to watch Hyung-woo squirm. More than that, she would be a pawn who mattered, who was seen, who had value beyond her reproductive capabilities. Maya reached for the whiskey glass with steady hands. She lifted it to her lips and took a long sip, letting the liquid burn down her throat, warming her from the inside out. When she set the glass down, she met Jae-won's gaze directly, seeing the challenge there, the test. "When do we start?" The smile that crossed Jae-won's face was predatory and satisfied, like a cat who'd successfully cornered his prey. Except Maya didn't feel like prey anymore. She felt like something else entirely, something dangerous. He pulled out his phone, typed something quickly, then showed her the screen. It was a calendar entry. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., personal shopper appointment at the Lotte department store flagship. The notification was already sent to someone named Director Choi. "Tomorrow," he said. "My driver will pick you up at noon. Bring nothing. We're starting fresh. New wardrobe, new image, new life." He finished his whiskey in one smooth motion. "And Maya? Don't go back to that apartment tonight. I'm texting you an address. The penthouse is ready now. Your real life starts the moment you walk out of this cafe." He stood, extending his hand to her. Not a handshake, an invitation. Maya took it. His grip was warm, firm, absolutely certain. She'd made a deal with the devil, and she'd never felt more alive. Maya woke up Saturday morning in sheets that felt like liquid silk, in a bedroom that overlooked the Han River, in a penthouse that seemed to exist in a different dimension from the cramped apartment she'd fled. For a moment, she wondered if the previous 24 hours had been an elaborate fever dream. Then, she saw the black card on the nightstand with Jae-won's personal number embossed in silver, and reality crashed back. She'd made a deal with the devil. Now it was time to become someone worthy of standing beside him. The team arrived at 9 sharp, announced by the concierge with the reverence usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. 6 people swept into the penthouse like a precision strike force, each carrying equipment that looked more appropriate for a photo shoot than a simple makeover. At the center of this controlled chaos was Yuna, Jae-won's personal stylist, a terrifyingly chic woman in her 40s who wore all black, spoke in rapid-fire Korean and English, and had a reputation for making socialites weep with her brutal honesty. She circled Maya like a predator assessing prey, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Maya stood in the living room wearing the previous day's clothes, feeling increasingly small under that clinical gaze. "Sit," Yuna commanded, pointing to a chair that had been set up near the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Let me see what we're working with." Maya sat. Yuna lifted sections of her hair, examined her skin in the bright natural light, tilted her face at various angles. The silence stretched uncomfortably until finally Yuna made a small sound of displeasure. "Who did this to you?" she asked, her fingers moving through Maya's chemically straightened hair. "This relaxer treatment, it's destroying your natural texture and these eyebrows." She shook her head. "You've been tweezing them to match Korean beauty standards, haven't you? Making yourself smaller, less distinctive." Maya felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I was trying to fit in, to be what his family wanted." "And what did that get you?" Yuna's tone wasn't unkind, just brutally factual. She met Maya's eyes in the mirror they'd positioned. "Kicked out of your own home, replaced, diminished." The words stung because they were true. "Well," Yuna stepped back, her expression shifting from assessment to determination. "We're not hiding you anymore. We're making them see exactly what they threw away." She turned to her team. "Start with a deep conditioning treatment. I want to see her natural hair texture, and book her with Dr. Kim for Monday. We need to reverse the damage from all those hormone treatments, get her skin glowing again." What followed was the most intensive 6 hours of Maya's life. Her hair was washed, conditioned, treated with products that smelled like heaven and probably cost more than a month's rent at her old place. A makeup artist named Min Ji worked on her face with the concentration of a surgeon, explaining each step. Skincare first, building a base that enhanced rather than covered, highlighting her features instead of minimizing them. "You have beautiful bone structure," Minji said, contouring her cheekbones. "Why were you hiding it?" Because Hyungwoo's mother had once said her face was too angular, too Western. Because she'd learned to make herself softer, rounder, less threatening. Because fitting in had seemed more important than standing out. But she didn't say any of that. She just watched in the mirror as her face emerged, not the subdued version she'd been presenting, but something bolder, more striking. Yuna returned with garment bags, each one holding a creation that Maya recognized from fashion magazines. "Jae-won-si wants you in Versace for tonight," she said, unzipping the first bag with the reverence the contents deserved. He was very specific about the color. The dress that emerged was breathtaking, deep emerald, silk that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light. Maya stood as they helped her into it, the fabric sliding over her skin like water. It hugged curves she'd forgotten she had, curves she'd been trying to minimize with loose clothing and strategic layering. The neckline was elegant but daring, the cut sophisticated, the color bringing out the richness of her brown skin in a way that made her look luminous. "Oh," Minji breathed. "Oh, that's perfect." Maya stared at her reflection. Her natural hair, no longer chemically straightened, had been shaped into an elegant style that framed her face beautifully, soft curls that moved when she turned her head, adding dimension and texture. Her skin glowed with health, her eyes seemed larger and more expressive, with the subtle makeup that enhanced rather than transformed. The emerald dress made her look powerful, confident, like she belonged in boardrooms and ballrooms. The woman in the mirror was completely foreign and somehow deeply familiar at the same time, as if Maya was seeing herself clearly for the first time in 4 years. "Diamond earrings," Yuna announced, opening a velvet box. "From Jae-won-si's family collection. On loan, so don't lose them. They're worth more than most people's houses." The earrings were exquisite, pear-shaped diamonds that caught the light and threw rainbows across the ceiling when Maya moved. They felt heavy with history and wealth, a physical reminder of the world she was entering. "One more thing." Yuna held out a small box. Inside was a delicate platinum bracelet set with emeralds that matched the dress. "This is yours to keep. A gift from Jae-won-si." Maya's hands trembled slightly as she fastened it around her wrist. The gesture felt significant, weighted with meaning she couldn't quite decipher. Was this a prop for their performance, or something more? "Perfect," a deep voice said from behind her. Maya spun to find Jae-won leaning against the doorframe, his presence overwhelming even in the spacious penthouse. He was dressed in a black suit that probably cost more than her old car. Tom Ford again. She was learning to recognize the cut. A white shirt, no tie, the top button undone in a way that should have looked casual, but instead looked deliberately, devastatingly calculated. His hair was swept back, his expression unreadable as he studied her. "Now they'll see what he threw away," he said quietly, moving into the room with that predatory grace she was beginning to recognize. Their first public appearance was scheduled for that evening, the Shilla Hotel Charity Gala, one of the most exclusive events on Seoul's social calendar. Maya knew the event intimately. She knew it because Hyungwoo had been desperately trying to secure an invitation for months, pulling every string he could reach, calling in favors, hoping to network with the investors and power brokers who would all be in attendance. He'd never gotten that invitation, but she had one. Now, on Jae-won's arm. Maya's stomach churned with a mixture of nerves and anticipation, so intense she felt dizzy. This was real. This was happening. In a few hours, she would walk into that ballroom and her old life would be officially, irrevocably over. "The car's ready," Yuna announced, packing up her supplies with efficient movements. "Remember, posture straight, chin up. You're not apologizing for existing anymore." The team filed out, leaving Maya alone with Jae-won. He moved closer, his hand settling on her lower back, warm and steadying through the silk of her dress. The gesture felt practiced, but also genuine, as if he knew exactly how terrified she was beneath the polished exterior. "Nervous?" he asked, his voice low enough that only she could hear. "Terrified," Maya admitted. There was no point in lying. He could probably feel her trembling. "Good." His hand pressed slightly firmer against her back. "Fear keeps you sharp, but remember, You're not his rejected wife tonight. You're not the woman who got replaced and pushed aside. You're my partner. You're someone who commands attention and respect. Act like it." Maya lifted her chin, meeting his eyes in the mirror positioned across the room. She saw herself standing beside him, matched, equal, powerful. Maybe it was an illusion. Maybe this was all performance and artifice. But for the first time in years, she looked at her reflection and felt something other than disappointment. "I won't let you down," she said, and meant it. His smile was slow and dangerous, the kind that probably made business rivals nervous and competitors reconsider their strategies. "I know." He offered his arm, and Maya took it, feeling the solid strength of him beneath the expensive fabric. They walked toward the private elevator, their reflections moving in sync in the polished marble floors. She was about to walk into a room full of Seoul's elite, the same people who'd witnessed her humiliation, who'd gossiped about her inadequacy as a wife, who'd watched Hyung-woo replace her without batting an eye. But she wasn't the same woman they'd dismissed. The elevator doors opened, revealing the underground garage where a black Mercedes waited, its door held open by a driver who bowed deeply. Maya stepped inside, settled into leather seats that probably cost more than most furniture, and watched as Jae-won slid in beside her. "Ready?" he asked. Maya thought about Hyung-woo and Soo-jin in her apartment, about his mother's cold dismissal, about every sacrifice she'd made, only to be thrown away like something defective and disposable. "Yes," she said, "I'm ready." The car pulled out into Seoul's evening traffic, heading toward the Shilla Hotel, toward her transformation's public debut, toward revenge served in Versace and diamonds. Maya felt every eye turn as they entered the grand ballroom, her hand resting lightly in the crook of Jae-won's arm. The room fell into a momentary hush. Conversations, cutting off mid-sentence as heads turned. She kept her spine straight, her chin lifted, exactly as Yuna had drilled into her. The emerald Versace caught the light from crystal chandeliers, the borrowed diamonds at her throat throwing prisms across nearby tables. She saw Hyung-woo before he saw her. He was standing near the bar with a cluster of young entrepreneurs, gesturing animatedly about something, probably pitching his startup for the 100th time that evening. Soo-jin stood beside him in a traditional hanbok, beautiful and demure, playing the role of perfect Korean girlfriend with practiced ease. Then, Hyung-woo's gaze landed on the entrance, on Maya, on Jae-won. The color drained from his face so quickly Maya thought he might actually faint. His wine glass tilted dangerously in his suddenly nerveless fingers. She watched realization crash over him in waves, recognition, confusion, disbelief, and finally, dawning horror as he understood exactly who was escorting his wife into the most important social event of the season. Soo-jin's confident smile faltered, her eyes darting between Hyung-woo and Maya with growing uncertainty. She said something in Korean, touching Hyung-woo's arm, but he didn't seem to hear her. Near the dessert table, Hyung-woo's mother was holding court with other society matrons, her teacup raised delicately. She turned at the sudden silence, following the collective gaze, and Maya had the profound satisfaction of watching the older woman's face cycle through shock, outrage, and something that looked remarkably like fear. Her teacup rattled against its saucer so violently that tea sloshed over the rim, staining her expensive silk hanbok. "Shall we?" Jae-won murmured, his hand pressing gently but firmly against Maya's lower back, guiding her deeper into the ballroom. The crowd parted for them like water around a ship's prow. Jae-won played his role with the skill of someone who'd been navigating these social waters his entire life, attentive without being possessive, proud without being boastful. He introduced Maya to Seoul's elite business leaders, to old money families, to politicians and investors and cultural influencers. "My brilliant creative director," he would say, his tone making it clear that Maya was more than just an employee, more than just an accessory. "She's revolutionizing our hotel marketing strategy. Her campaign for the Busan property increased bookings by 30% in the first quarter." Maya hadn't actually started working yet, but she played along, discussing her ideas with the confidence of someone who belonged in these conversations. And surprisingly, people listened. They engaged. They treated her like someone worth knowing, not because she was Hyung-woo Park's wife, but because she was Kang Jae-won's partner. His hand never left the small of her back, a constant warm pressure that somehow managed to feel protective and possessive simultaneously. Cameras flashed constantly. Society photographers jockeying for position. Guests not so subtly taking photos with their phones. Maya could practically see the social media posts being composed in real time, the speculation and gossip spreading like wildfire through Seoul's interconnected elite circles. By the time they left, Jae-won orchestrating their exit with perfect timing, neither too early nor too late, photos had already flooded social media. Seoul's most eligible bachelor with the abandoned wife. The captions wrote themselves, Kang Jae-won's new romance, from rejected to reclaimed, tech entrepreneur's ex-wife upgrades. The speculation was vicious and delicious in equal measure. Maya's phone buzzed constantly with notifications, old acquaintances suddenly remembering she existed, society bloggers requesting comments, even a few news outlets wanting interviews. She ignored them all, but she read the headlines, absorbed the gossip, felt the narrative shifting in real time. By week 2, the damage began manifesting in concrete ways. Jae-won's investment group announced they were reassessing their participation in Hyungwoo's Series C funding round. The press release was deliberately vague, citing concerns about company leadership and strategic direction, but everyone knew what it really meant. Kang Jae-won had withdrawn his blessing, and his displeasure sent shockwaves through the investment community. By week 4, 3 other investors pulled out, spooked by the social scandal and unwilling to go against Kang Jae-won's subtle but unmistakable disapproval. Hyungwoo's startup, which had been valued at $50 million just months ago, was suddenly hemorrhaging opportunity. Maya heard through the grapevine that he was desperately trying to salvage the situation, taking meetings anywhere he could get them, but doors that had been open were now mysteriously closed. Maya should have felt triumphant watching his world crumble. She'd imagined this moment during those first awful days, Hyungwoo suffering consequences, his ambitions frustrated, his pride wounded. She'd fantasized about his regret, his realization of what he'd thrown away. Instead, she felt oddly empty, like revenge wasn't enough to fill the hole Hyungwoo had carved into her life. The satisfaction was hollow, temporary, leaving her feeling more lost than vindicated. She was sitting in her Gangnam penthouse on a Friday evening, staring out at the Han River and wondering why victory felt so much like loneliness, when her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. You deserve to know the truth. The text was followed by an attachment. Medical records. She clicked on it with shaking fingers, her heart beginning to pound as she recognized the hospital letterhead, one of Seoul's most prestigious fertility clinics. Patient name, Park Hyungwoo. Date, 2 years ago, right in the middle of their IVF nightmare. Maya's eyes scanned the document, medical terminology she'd learned. To understand through painful experience. Then she saw it. The diagnosis buried in clinical language, stark and undeniable. Severe oligospermia. Azoospermia in subsequent tests. Infertility, primary male factor. Prognosis for natural conception, 0%. Prognosis even with IVF, less than 3%. Hyungwoo was infertile, had been the entire time. Maya's hands began to shake so violently she nearly dropped her phone. She scrolled further, finding notes from consultations, recommendations for genetic testing, suggestions for sperm donation or adoption. And then, a note that made her blood run cold. Patient declined to inform spouse of diagnosis. Mother present at consultation. Requested all records be marked confidential and all future communications reference only female factor infertility. His mother had known, had been at the appointment when they received the diagnosis, had requested, no, demanded, that the doctors blame Maya instead. Maya scrolled to the next attachment, financial records showing payments to the clinic, large sums marked administrative fees, but clearly bribes to ensure doctors would focus their invasive procedures on Maya, would tell her that her eggs were the problem, that her body was failing, that she was the reason their family remained incomplete. The cruelty of it stole Maya's breath. She'd endured 3 years of invasive treatments, hormone injections that made her sick and weak, procedures that left her body aching and her emotions shattered. Her confidence had been systematically destroyed, her body scrutinized and judged and found wanting, all while being told it was her fault, her failure, her inadequacy. They'd let her believe she was broken, let her blame herself, let her sacrifice her career, her savings, her identity, her health, everything, to fix a problem that was never hers. The medical records continued. More recent documents showing Hyungwoo's mother's plan. Find a young Korean woman willing to adopt children, possibly through surrogacy with donor sperm, and pretend they were Hyungwoo's biological offspring. Preserve the family line in name if not in genetics. Protect her son's pride and his image as a virile, successful man. Soo-jin probably didn't even know. She was just another pawn in a cruel game orchestrated by a woman so obsessed with appearances and family legacy that she destroyed an innocent person to protect her son's ego. Maya stood up, her legs unsteady, and walked to the window. The city spread out before her, millions of lights in the darkness, and she felt disconnected from all of it. Rage burned through her chest, white-hot and purifying, burning away the last remnants of self-doubt and grief. She'd spent weeks feeling empty because she'd thought revenge was petty. She'd thought she was being vindictive, that maybe Hyungwoo had been cruel but not malicious, that she should take her settlement and move on with dignity. But this wasn't a mistake, or a moment of weakness. This was calculated, systematic cruelty. They'd tortured her for years with a lie, let her body and spirit break under the weight of false guilt, discarded her when she'd served her purpose as scapegoat. The invitation came through Hyungwoo's mother, a desperate, thinly veiled plea disguised as a formal family dinner request. Maya read the message with grim satisfaction. The woman who'd once dismissed her so casually was now begging for an audience, trying to reconcile her son's marriage while his business imploded spectacularly around him. The restaurant was one of those exclusive establishments in Cheongdam-dong where privacy cost more than the food, private rooms with soundproofing, staff trained in discretion, the kind of place where Seoul's elite conducted sensitive business away from prying eyes. Maya had been there before, always as a silent appendage to Hyungwoo, always relegated to the background while important conversations happened around her. Not tonight. She arrived with Jae-won at precisely the appointed time, neither early nor late. His driver opened the door, and they stepped out in perfect synchronization. Maya wore a simple black Chanel dress, elegant, understated, armor disguised as fashion. Jae-won was in his usual Tom Ford, his presence beside her both shield and statement. The hostess led them to the private room with barely concealed nervousness. She clearly recognized Jae-won, understood the implications of his presence, knew that whatever was about to happen in that room would have consequences that rippled far beyond one family dinner. Maya pushed open the door. Hyungwoo's mother sat at the head of the table in traditional hanbok, her posture rigid, her face carefully composed but unable to hide the strain around her eyes and mouth. Hyungwoo occupied the seat to her right, looking diminished somehow, as if the past weeks had physically shrunk him. His suit was expensive but rumpled, his tie slightly askew, his eyes carrying shadows that spoke of sleepless nights and mounting panic. Soo-jin sat across from him, her hands folded primly in her lap, her expression uncomfortable. Maya felt an unexpected flash of sympathy for the younger woman. Another piece moved around the board by Hyungwoo's mother, another person who'd been lied to and used. The private room fell into absolute silence as Maya walked in, Jae-won beside her like a dark guardian. His presence dominated the space immediately, making the expensive restaurant suddenly feel small and confined. He pulled out Maya's chair with deliberate courtesy, then took the seat beside her, his body angled slightly toward her, protective, possessive, unmistakably allied. "Maya-si," Hyungwoo's mother began, her voice carrying forced warmth that fooled no one. "Thank you for coming. We've missed you at family gatherings. This unfortunate misunderstanding has gone on long enough." "We need to talk," Hyungwoo interrupted, his voice cracking slightly with desperation. He leaned forward, his hands flat on the table. "About us, about fixing this, about our marriage. I made mistakes, I know that, but we can work through this. We can—" Maya reached into her purse with deliberate slowness. Every eye tracked the movement. She withdrew a manila envelope, opened it with precise movements, and slid the medical records across the table. They landed in front of Hyungwoo with a soft whisper that somehow sounded loud in the suffocating silence. "There's nothing to fix," Maya said, her voice steady and cold as winter steel. "There never was." Hyungwoo's hands trembled as he picked up the documents. Maya watched his face drain of color as he recognized the hospital letterhead, the dates, his own name at the top of each page. His eyes darted across the text, diagnosis, prognosis, consultation notes, and she saw the exact moment reality crashed down on him. His mother's teacup clattered to the floor, shattering into porcelain fragments that scattered across the expensive carpet. The sound, seemed to echo in the frozen silence, punctuating the destruction of carefully constructed lies. "How did you—" she started, then stopped, her composure cracking like ice in spring thaw. "You lied," Maya said, her voice cutting through the older woman's attempted deflection. She looked at Hyung-woo, held his gaze, let him see the full weight of her fury and betrayal. "For 3 years, you let me destroy my body trying to fix something that was your problem. Your mother paid doctors to falsify my test results, to focus all their invasive procedures on me, to tell me over and over that my body was failing." She turned her attention to Hyung-woo's mother, who had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "You knew I was fine. You sat in that consultation room and heard the diagnosis, male factor infertility, and you made the conscious choice to torture me instead, to let your son's inadequacy become my shame." "Maya, please!" Hyung-woo's hand shot across the table, reaching for hers. Jae-won's hand intercepted it with frightening speed, his fingers closing around Hyung-woo's wrist with a grip that was visibly painful. Hyung-woo gasped, his face contorting. "Don't touch her," Jae-won said quietly. The words were soft, but they carried the weight of absolute authority, of violence held carefully in check. "Not ever again." He released Hyung-woo's wrist with a slight push that sent him back into his chair. Hyung-woo cradled his arm, red marks already blooming where Jae-won's fingers had been. Soo-jin had been reading the documents over Hyung-woo's shoulder, her expression shifting from confusion to comprehension to horror. She stood abruptly, her chair scraping loudly against the floor, breaking the terrible tension. "You told me she was infertile," she said, her voice shaking with anger and humiliation. "That's why you needed to marry someone else. That's why your mother said you needed a new wife, someone who could give you children." She looked at Maya, and there was genuine sympathy in her eyes, a recognition of shared victimhood. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I never would have agreed if I'd known the truth." Soo-jin grabbed her purse, her movements sharp with barely controlled fury. "I'm leaving. Tonight. Don't contact me. Don't try to explain. I won't be part of your lies." She walked out without looking back, the door closing behind her with a finality that seemed to suck the remaining air from the room. Hyung-woo's mother finally found her voice. "This is a family matter. It doesn't concern." She gestured vaguely at Jae-won, unable to even say his name, as if acknowledging his presence would give him more power. "Everything concerning Maya concerns me," Jae-won replied, his tone conversational but edged with steel. He leaned back in his chair, the picture of relaxed confidence. "And I should mention, those medical records, they're already with my legal team, and my contacts at several media outlets. The story of how a prominent Seoul family systematically abused and defrauded a young woman to cover up their son's infertility and protect their precious reputation. That's quite newsworthy." The color drained from Hyung-woo's mother's face so quickly, Maya thought she might actually faint. "You wouldn't," she whispered. "I would," Jae-won said pleasantly. "Unless, of course, the divorce proceedings go very smoothly. Maya gets everything she's entitled to and more. Compensation for the medical abuse, for the emotional distress, for 3 years of torture. You sign the papers, write the checks, and disappear from her life forever." He smiled, and it was the most dangerous expression Maya had ever seen. "Do that, and maybe your family's shame stays private. Maybe your social standing survives. Maybe your son's business connections aren't completely destroyed." He paused. "Refuse, and I promise you, I will make sure everyone in Seoul knows exactly what you did." The weeks that followed were a cascade of destruction so complete it almost felt biblical. Soo-jin left that night as promised, bags packed, her departure making headlines in society blogs and gossip columns. Her family, learning the truth, publicly distanced themselves from Hyung-woo and his mother, their withdrawal carrying weight in Seoul's tightly interconnected elite circles. Other investors abandoned Hyung-woo's startup like rats fleeing a sinking ship, spooked not just by Jae-won's subtle disapproval, but by the mounting scandal. Who wanted to be associated with a man who'd tortured his wife with medical fraud? Who wanted their name linked to that kind of cruelty? Hyung-woo's mother's shame became public knowledge, her manipulation exposed through carefully placed leaks that Jae-won orchestrated with surgical precision. She was quietly asked to step down from several charity boards. Invitations to exclusive events mysteriously dried up. Longtime friends suddenly became unavailable. Within 3 months, Hyung-woo had lost everything, his company forced to declare bankruptcy, his reputation in tatters, his family's standing in the community demolished. His mother, once a respected figure in Seoul's society circles, became a cautionary tale whispered about at dinner parties. Maya filed for divorce through Jae-won's legal team, their lawyers so skilled and thorough that Hyung-woo's counsel advised him not to contest anything. The settlement was generous by any standard: compensation for medical abuse, return of all funds Maya had invested in his startup, plus additional damages. Hyung-woo signed the papers with shaking hands, his signature barely legible. Maya stood in her attorney's office, watching him sign away their marriage, and felt nothing but relief. 4 years of her life erased with a few strokes of a pen. The man she'd loved, or thought she'd loved, reduced to a stranger whose signature was merely an obstacle to clear. "It's done," her lawyer said, sliding the finalized documents across the desk. "You're free." Free. The word should have felt triumphant. Instead, it felt like standing on the edge of a cliff, looking down into an unknown future that was both terrifying and full of possibility. Maya walked out of that office a divorced woman, her past officially severed, her future unwritten. She stood on the Seoul street in the afternoon sunlight, breathing in air that somehow tasted different, cleaner, lighter, full of potential. Her phone buzzed, a message from Jae-won. "Dinner tonight? We should talk about your next chapter." Maya looked at the message, at the man who'd helped her destroy her enemies, who'd given her the tools for revenge and the platform for reinvention. Their 3-month arrangement was nearly over. Soon she'd be truly on her own, standing on her own merit, building a life that belonged only to her. She typed her response. "Yes, but this time I'm choosing the restaurant." It was a small assertion of independence, but it felt monumental. She was done being led, done following someone else's script. Maya was finally ready to write her own story.